help complete the rest of the system. And I'm wondering what you see as the sort of thresholds that would demonstrate that, and whether you've had any interest from private investment at this point. Sort of what would it take to tilt that balance, assuming that, so where is their level, if you go from 1 to 10, where is private investment now on this, on helping to complete the entire project, and what would it take to get them up to 10 where they're kind of in?
I think ideally for private investment in this project, they would want to see a demonstration that you can run a for-profit service, essentially, that your net revenues will exceed your net costs. In our valley-to-valley approach from Bakersfield to San Francisco, we propose that we will be able to do that.
So this section, though, is supposed to demonstrate that. So how do you do that in this section?
This section will not demonstrate that, but this section will do other things that are important. This section for us will assure the assets that we are spending billions to build in this part of the state will not go to waste, will be put to use, and will be put to use for electrified high-speed rail consistent with our mission under the law. And it will reduce travel times, it'll clean up the air, and it will provide a better transportation system in an area of the state that has little public transit. And so that is why we want to start there. Again, we acknowledge that the sort of break point on the operations versus cost stretch is likely Bakersfield all the way to the Bay to San Francisco. We don't have all the money we need to build that stretch yet. It's still our objective. But we're going to finish that environmental work, and that's the other point I want to make. To really get environmental interest in these types of mega projects and this type of project, you have to reduce risks or they will not play. And so I think the way you do that is you get the environmental work done. And so when I talk about getting all of our environmental work done in the next 18 to 24 months, to me that is a precursor to really inviting a lot of private sector opportunity on this project in terms of helping meet capital costs. But the other thing I must say, because it's the newest and most exciting development on this project, for the first time, private sector interest is demonstrated with the Virgin train system in Southern California. Again, they're taking the risk on the first segment of that, again, a building block approach, Las Vegas to Victorville, and they ultimately are going to need help to get to Palmdale. But I know, and I've talked to them, they have no intention of having their Las Vegas run be Las Vegas to Victorville. They want to get to Palmdale and they want to get to Los Angeles. And they want to do it on shared assets that we both have, because that's how you do it under the quickest travel time possible. And so clearing that environmental work, entering an MOU with them on how we might be able to proceed together in Southern California to close that loop, I think those are important steps in front of us. But in essence, I guess what I'm saying is to attract private sector investment, you need to reduce risk. And one way you do that is get all the environmental work done. And then secondly, you want to demonstrate the viability of the program.
So it's that second part that I'm asking about.
Yeah.
Because I understand that there's a proposition and there's funding and you have to spend it.
Yep. And
I understand the part about doing the environmental work so that you reduce that risk and you get ready to lay your project out. It's the building block part that I'm trying to understand the link between this particular building block and demonstrating viability.
Yeah.
So what is it that you want to see out of this in terms of sort of increased ridership, and how does this fit into that to really demonstrate that viability? Because I agree with you. I think that demonstrating that people are willing to take trains is very important to getting the interest for the system-wide high-speed rail. But why is this section and the investment in this section going to demonstrate that as opposed to an investment that we might have had in another section?
Because there's no other section in the state of California where we can move trains at 200 miles per hour electrified.
So
why I think that is important is because that is where you get the time savings that you can present with this kind of a system.
So let's talk about that for a second.
Sure.
So now I understand the time savings from Bakersfield to Merced. It's a big distance, and you're going to have a much faster train. But let's say you're in Fresno. You're right here in Fresno, and you want to go to the Bay Area. And my understanding from speaking to you earlier is that it's your hope that once this section is completed, the Amtrak train that right now is redundant with that route, that you'll have less of those Amtrak trains, and people will instead be taking the high-speed rail. So from Fresno, you go to Merced, which is one stop, and then you change trains. And then you continue to the Bay Area or to Sacramento or wherever you're going. Now, it seems to me that your time saving at that point becomes essentially a wash, because I don't see how you get people off the train and back on the other train with their baggage and their strollers, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes? I take the train a lot. I have to change trains at Union Station all the time, and you're talking just Metro to Metro or Amtrak to Metro. That Amtrak train is there for quite a while. And that's best case scenario, that you arrive on high-speed rail and you've got the Amtrak train waiting, ready to go. They've put the food on it, they're geared, they're ready to go. You're still talking at least 15 minutes to get people from one to the other, maybe 20 minutes. So for your Fresno group who gets on in Fresno, it doesn't seem that you're offering them any time saving, but you are asking them to change trains now in the middle.
I think they'll have more than one option. My sense of it is they'll have an option to stay on conventional rail and go from Fresno to Oakland or Fresno to Sacramento under the amount of time it takes to travel on that today.
But you said that you're going to be reducing that from 7 to 9 trips a day to 2 trips a day.
Well, as I said earlier, subject to an operating agreement we have not yet completed with our local partners. But here's what we're intending to do. Right now in Merced, there's an Amtrak station in one location and no ACE station at all. The state of California, the legislature, invested $800 million in getting ACE to Merced and increasing the number of trips that Amtrak can take into Merced. What we are proposing to do is have the Amtrak station, the Merced station, and the the Amtrak station, the ACE station, and the high-speed rail station all go to one place in Merced. And then transfers and things like that will be simpler. I don't know what the travel time is from Fresno to Merced because I haven't modeled that. What I have modeled is Merced to Bakersfield and a 90 and 100 minute reduction versus travel time today. And so, yes, if they choose high-speed rail, they'll get to Merced quicker than they would on the conventional rail. They'll cross a platform, get on Amtrak if they want to take Amtrak or ACE, and get to either the Bay Area or Sacramento. As an interim measure.
Right, and by the way, I'm not asking you these questions to be argumentative or to say that there's anything necessarily wrong about the approach, but I want to make sure that we all understand what we're talking about and that as we make these investments, we all understand this so that we're able to make choices with our funding that make it, again, my goal is I want to get people on these trains. Whatever trains they are, I want them on the trains, and I want to make sure we understand what the experience is going to be for them, because I'm from a region where sometimes our use of public transportation is not going in the direction we'd like. It's going down, not up. And as somebody who, I gave up my car for 2 years and just rode buses and trains, that experience that users have is very important if you really want to encourage them to use your system. So I just want to make sure, I'm not trying to argue with you, I want to understand what the experience is going to be for those riders. So let me ask a little bit of and I'm sorry, this will be sort of my last line of questioning. You're a newer executive director. I want to ask you a little bit about some of the old practice of high-speed rail, because before I was in the Assembly, I was a commissioner at the Burbank Airport and had the experience of being a commissioner there and dealing with an airport trying to build a new terminal. For those of you who don't know, fly into Burbank. Hopefully in a few years you will have a much safer, nicer new terminal there. And it's been a very long, maybe 20-year process of Burbank trying to get permission to build this very important terminal for safety and everything else. And it involved selling a very large piece of property that the airport owned. And it was a lot of moving pieces that were being put together. That was the work of many years. And right when we were very close to the end of getting our permissions and selling our property, High-Speed Rail Authority at the time sort of showed up out of the blue and at a public meeting asked us to stop the sale of the property, to change directions, to maybe not build the terminal right away. Very surprising behavior from agency to agency. So and I had a similar experience when I was on the Glendale City Council of High-Speed Rail telling us that their train was going through here and looking at the map and saying, that's the Disney campus, that's the DreamWorks campus, that's a historic train station on the historic register. Like, where are you with, and a lot of your issues coming through Los Angeles, you have the issue of a very dense area with a lot of disruption, but the secondary issue to that is dealing with a multitude of city councils and neighborhood councils and everybody kind of being on board and understanding what has to happen. So where are you with communications and having a better way to understand what the needs are as you go into dense areas and communicating maybe better than the previous regime with all of the different agencies and entities you have to deal with? And how do you manage that so that you don't have tremendous fights when you go through the San Fernando Valley, that you don't tell a small city like City of San Fernando that they're going to lose their entire downtown to high-speed rail? How do you work around that?
Let me first say I appreciate the question. I also appreciate your point about this is a larger strategy of getting people to use both high-speed rail and conventional rails at the regional levels where it's available. I think I'm so passionate about this project because it is the most transformative project I've seen in 25 years of working in transportation, and I think the idea of connecting cities of California through electrified high-speed rail will enhance local and regional transit service as well. So I am passionate about that. On to your second question, strictly on the Burbank example, one of the things that I've tried to do since I've been here is work toward being more specific and clear about what we are doing. That manifests itself in a couple of ways. For a long time before I got here, the authority had not quite yet even adopted its preferred alternatives for some of its where it's intending to go. And so in 2018, we completed the preferred alternatives for the Southern California area, and in the Bay Area, we completed that just a couple of months ago. But doing that helps enhance the community conversation, because it now tends to focus on where we intend to go as a preferred alternative, and it helps us work through with the city's more specific issues, city or county or local partners, more specific issues that are on the table. Right after we did our preferred alternative, I flew down and spoke with the Burbank Airport. I've got a meeting this week with the city of Burbank to talk more about this. One handicap I currently have in the Southern California region is that we're in the middle of changing out our regional directors, who will be part of our leads and communication down there. But that's we have candidates we're interviewing now, and we'll be replacing that as well. The other approach that is just part of this is that we are sitting and listening on the front end of things and not waiting till the end to recognize we have some kind of problem. And two examples I'd give you of that are, in our stretch between Bakersfield and Palmdale, there's the Chavez Memorial Monument that is up in the Tehachapi's, and there's been a lot of consternation and some back and forth about where and how the train will get around that segment. We decided to delay things for 6 months and just have a concentrated conversation with that entity to work through how we will do that. And I think we've made significant progress there. Similarly, a little further south in the next segment, there's an issue that we worked through with the Army Corps of Engineers called a place called Una Lake, with how we will get through Una Lake. Rather than just marching forward, not listening, and having a fight at the end, we're engaging earlier and having these conversations on the front end and trying to work through these issues. So part of it is taking the time earlier. First of all, it's being more specific and clear about what our intentions are. And then taking the time to have the conversations, to listen to the communities and figure out where we disagree, and then work toward some kind of a solution. And so that's the approach I've tried to bring to this since I've been here. I think it's the approach that my board insists on in terms of having a better outreach effort and community response effort. And so that's, in short, that's what I try to do.
Good, and and you and I have had this conversation before, but certainly when it comes to Burbank Airport, yes. It's a major transportation hub of yes. being a major regional airport. There's also 2 Metrolink trains. They're building a new terminal. Yeah. At some point, you may be building a terminal there as well, and it would just be great if, for passengers, they have a seamless experience from one of these travel modalities to the other. I don't see that planning happening, quite honestly. I see them building a terminal without any thought to how it connects with whatever, if you're going to build a terminal. I know it's far off in the future. Maybe it happens, maybe it doesn't, but I still don't see that kind of coordination. And there's a lot of pointing at other countries and their experience with high-speed rail, and I don't see the same attempt to tie airport to high-speed rail the way that we've seen it work effectively in other places. I still have this sort of nightmare that they're going to build their terminal. One day you come in and you build your terminal, and people have to walk a half a mile to get from one to the other, or somebody has to build some expensive thing to bring them back and forth. And I just hope that as we think about regional transportation hubs, that we really think of it that way and get out of our silos and work
Right.
and work it from the viewpoint of a user and a good user experience, and having something that is planned in advance so that we don't have the additional expenses of having to go back and retrofit and build trains to airports like we're doing at LAX and everything else.
I agree with you, and would just say that right now I'm at sort of the midpoint of conversations with the Burbank Airport, the City of Burbank, and the FAA on exactly how we'd come in there and when. And everybody's got their own environmental document, so we're trying to figure out how to make that work. But even the lead at the Burbank Airport said to me in our most recent meeting how important it was that we're making it very easier for the passengers to, get there and get from a train station to the terminal to ultimately fly. And so clearly that's something we want to get to. The question is, and it sort of gets to a process issue, how do you do it the best while having everybody move forward on their environmental review process? And so that's conversations we're engaged in real time right now. And I'm happy to meet with you on that going forward.
If I may, just for one moment. I'm aware of what you were talking about earlier with Burbank. The intention was, as you more or less defined, how can we work together and generate a transportation hub that was really important to us and clearly important to Burbank. The challenge was the message on our side was really not very clear and certainly mishandled. I think that is something that over the years we've learned a lot about interaction with those stakeholders that we are working with and around. That was very unfortunate because I really did see the opportunity with what we could have done together with Burbank at that point.
Well, again, I'm not trying to make this about Burbank. I think this is something you need to be mindful of in the entire section of your project. I only experienced it in one place, but I imagine that you're having the same kind of interactions with other agencies across the state, and it's a concern of mine.
Thank you. We appreciate
Thank you.
that also.
With that, I'd like to thank Director Kelly and Vice Chair Richards and invite the second panel to come forward. And as they're coming forward, I want to acknowledge the board members of the High Speed Rail Authority who are present. We have Danny Curtin, of course, Vice Chair Richards, Henry Perea, and Jim Gielmetti, who are our newest members. So now I would like to invite Danny Curtin, Mark Evans, Helen Kirstein, Louis Thompson, Stacy Mortensen, and Stephanie Wiggins. If we can, just in trying to keep things succinct, I may start with Mark Evans and then transition to Danny Curtin, since you have a presentation to make.
Yes, thank you. I'm Mark Evans, represent the early train operator. I work with Deutsche Bahn Engineering and Consulting USA. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to speak, and fellow committee members. Yes, so I'll put this in a little bit of context for you. So you should have a paper copy in front of you. So, and right behind you then is the presentation. Last spring, the early train operator completed a study looking at two potential early operation segments, one being the Peninsula Corridor, which is 4th and King in the San Francisco Bay Area, down to Gilroy Station, and the other corridor was the Central Valley Corridor, so Merced or Madera to Poplar Avenue, and then later expanded to include Merced and Bakersfield. The result of that study is on slide 2, and the study basically looked at revenue versus operating income over those corridors in the future. And the Central Valley Corridor, we determined that we could offer more train miles there, or at least the authority could offer more train miles there, a reduction of travel time, a more efficient cost per mile. If you look at that as a standalone segment, also interfacing and being integrated in with the ACE and San Joaquin lines. And then on the Peninsula Corridor, we determined that you already have a very mature and robust commuter rail network in the Peninsula Corridor, so we'd be adding essentially a couple of more trains to that existing network, but it's not connected to the Central Valley. It would still be captured within that corridor of 4th and King to Gilroy Station. So we did see benefit there. We did see increased ridership and certainly an attractive, what we call an express train running from Gilroy Station into 4th and King. But it would be somewhat incremental in that you already have a mature network and system in the Peninsula Corridor. At the completion of that, we presented, and the results of that was presented in the project update report by the California High-Speed Rail Authority. In the project update report, there is a slide 3, there is a look at the investments required for the Central Valley, and these investments were laid out for $15.6 billion would be required to complete the Madera to Poplar Avenue leg, not including Merced and not including Bakersfield, and it would not include the purchase of high-speed rail rolling stock. The next bar you see in the middle, it shows $17.9 billion would be required if we extended south to Bakersfield. It included rolling stock in that extension. And then the far right bar shows Merced to Bakersfield, including all systems and rolling stock, would be at $20.4 billion. So the question came, the 15.6 was approved, but the question came, where's the other 4.8 billion coming from? That was addressed, and then the question was, is this the best place to invest the 4.8 billion? So one option would be to leave the Madera to Poplar's Avenue run for the completed infrastructure, and then take the 4.8 billion and move it to either the Peninsula Corridor or utilize it in the LA area in what we call the Southern Cal Corridor. And so we, as the ETO, were commissioned to then complete a second study, which would look at the side-by-side comparison of that $4.8 billion being invested in Peninsula Corridor, or Northern California, or Central Valley, or Southern California in the LA area. So we started in the summer taking a look at that. On slide 4. We outline what I just said verbally, basically, is what those corridors would be. We would take a look at this side-by-side comparison and the best way to invest the $4.8 billion. On slide 5, we started our qualitative, it talks about our qualitative analysis. So we broke the study into 2 phases. Phase 1 is a qualitative phase. We reach out to the stakeholders in the area, such as Lausanne, Caltrain, Caltrans, CalSTA, the San Joaquin Regional Rail Commission, and as well as the ACE line. And we looked at, and we talked to them about how they could best use the money in those various areas. And so we gathered data to develop a landscape or an understanding of what the interfaces would be and how we would use those funds, where they are in their construction and in their own funding of their own lines. And we did this comparison, and we have some preliminary conclusions that we drew from there, and those are the qualitative. So they're early indicators of how we think the quantitative phase will go. And the quantitative phase will deep dive then into ridership, greenhouse gas emissions, and congestion relief in those 3 corridors, and we're working on that now. So the qualitative analysis was released to the public, I think, just a week ago, and the full report is available on the California High-Speed Rail webpage. So I take you to slide 6. On slide 6, then we get really into the meat of what we're talking about. So I'll orient you first towards the chart because there's a lot of data here. On the far left side, we mentioned the 3 corridors, the Peninsula Corridor, NorCal, and what that includes, the Central Valley Corridor, and the Southern California Corridor. The next column talks about service provided at what cost. The third column from the left more or less talks about an existing scenario. This is where we are today before additional investments. And I'll go through these in more detail as soon as I finish the chart. Scenario 2 looks at what investments are currently committed to in those three corridors. Scenario 3 would be what additional investments would be required. And then scenario 4 would be in order to operate and provide full high-speed rail service in those three corridors, what those costs would be. So I just skipped to scenario 2 because in reality that's where we are. There's work ongoing in Northern California, in Central Valley, and in Southern California with existing funding. So in Northern California, if we were to, what you're getting right now in Northern California with the current investments are this is per hour number of trains per direction. So this is what, to make these numbers make a little sense to you. So in Peninsula Corridor, we have, we're moving towards 4 electrified Caltrains trains per direction per hour during peak. With the additional enhancements to the line that are currently being constructed, they'll have 2 diesel Caltrain trains per direction per hour during peak for a total of 6 trains being offered. In the Central Valley, there is no enhancement to the Central Valley because it's the California high-speed rail system, which is under construction, so there would be no change. And then in the Southern California, primarily through Metrolink, you have 2 express trains per hour, 4 regional trains per hour per direction during peak for a total of 6 trains, and none of those are electrified under the current funding scenarios. If we move the $4.8 billion into the Peninsula Corridor, what we would be able to accomplish there is we would have 8 Caltrain trains running per direction per hour during peak. And those would be electrified as currently under the current plan. The $4 billion would essentially go towards moving the Union Pacific track to the side in that corridor and bringing in 2 electrified tracks to support future high-speed rail traffic. In the Central Valley, again, the money is going towards extending to Merced on the top end, on the north end, and Bakersfield on the south end, so you see no change in service because it's not completed under that scenario. And in Southern California, you would see an addition of 2 regional trains, bringing the total regional trains to 6, plus 2 express trains for 8 total trains per hour per direction, and again, those are not electrified. Should be pointed out here that the cost to do that, the cost to achieve scenario 3, and this is the run between Burbank Airport and Anaheim Station only. That's the only area that's currently in the phase 1 of the California High-Speed Rail Plan. We estimate that it will require around $7 billion to complete scenario 3, of which only $4.8 billion would come from the high-speed rail funding. So scenario 4, how to achieve full high-speed rail service in the 3 corridors. Once the Caltrain, the Gilroy to San Jose section is completed and electrified, we would then run 8 Caltrain trains and 2 high-speed trains for a 10 total. The additional cost there is $3 billion on top of the 4 in scenario 3, and it would would not include high-speed rail rolling stock in that additional fund. Sorry, would not include that. So you still do not have a high-speed rail system as far as trains go. You do have the infrastructure there, but you're not connected to the Central Valley. You're still working in a commuter network environment. In the Central Valley, then, we would have 1 high-speed rail train per direction at peak for a total of 18 trains per day, running between Bakersfield and Merced. The cost of that, $4.8 billion, which we've identified earlier. And then finally, in Southern California, to achieve 2 express trains per direction at peak, plus 6 regional and 2 high-speed rail trains, would require additional $5 billion on top of the 7 in scenario 3. So you're talking between 10 and $12 billion, of which the 4.8 only partially funds. So what conclusions can we draw from that? If we look at slide 7, the main thing we're saying here is that in the Peninsula Corridor, with the investment of $4 billion, we can electrify the tracks from San Jose to Gilroy, but you still cannot run over 110 miles an hour because of all the level crossings in that corridor. It definitely does add capacity to the existing system, but the question is, between scenario 3 and scenario 4, is there enough funding to actually bring you to that point of scenario 4? In the Central Valley, you would be running the 4.8 billion. It would have true high-speed service, as Mr. Kelly mentioned earlier, at speeds up to 220 miles an hour. And we're actually then able to demonstrate and move a step closer towards real high-speed rail in the state of California. On the Southern California corridor, we would achieve grade separation, flyovers, and additional tracks, as well as electrification in the Southern California, but at the cost of roughly $12 billion, and we'd be able to achieve speeds between 110 and 125 miles an hour in that corridor. So the next couple of slides more or less just reiterate what I spoke about. So I'll just hit a few high points. The Northern California corridor requires regional investment in addition to the high-speed rail investment, and that's additional fleet and capacity and the appropriate signaling system. The Caltrans business plan highlights these capital requirements for non-high-speed rail rolling stock and rail systems. We believe there are marginal benefits from standalone high-speed rail service until it connects with the Central Valley. So it does add some capacity, but we're not talking really high-speed rail in the corridor. In Southern California, the scenario is similar. We believe that by if you move the money into Southern California, it does provide a base funding for future improvements and enhancements in the Metrolink system between Anaheim and Burbank, but not enough to complete the work and bring you to total high-speed rail capability. And again, it would not still include rolling stock, and it's not connected to the Central Valley. It's still a standalone segment. Without enhancements in the regional connections moving into that Anaheim to Burbank, you really won't see a lot of benefits there. And then the Central Valley, standalone high-speed rail operation between Merced and Bakersfield, and we're running at 200 miles an hour. We believe it will create significant value, significant interest, and will also improve the ridership, even though we haven't done the quantitative section yet. That's coming, but we believe preliminarily that it'll improve the ridership with the connection to an enhanced ACE and enhanced San Joaquin regional rail system. The reason we say that is we've been in close communication and contact with CalSTA regarding the plans to upgrade both the ACE and the San Joaquin lines and bringing those as feeder lines into the high-speed rail backbone network sitting between Merced and Bakersfield. Train miles more than double, reduction of travel time. These are all findings from the earlier studies. And again, it'll complement the enhancements of the feeder lines. If we leave the money in the Central Valley, if the money remains in the Central Valley, the high-speed rail service in the Central Valley, if we do not leave the $4.8 billion in the Central Valley, if we do not leave it there, the high-speed rail service in the Central Valley will be delayed until additional funding for valley-to-valley project is viable. So basically, you'll have the infrastructure there, but you will not have the rolling stock, and you'll be running a limited run between Madera and Poplar, and the connectivity on the north end with Merced with ACE and San Joaquin lines will be problematic, as the ACE line will dead end into the Merced station. So then we have to put folks on a bus and move them down to Madera. So there's problems on connectivity. If we run conventional rail on the system instead of running high-speed rail, the signaling system and other infrastructure requirements will be more or less thrown away when you go to high-speed rail, because you're using a different kind of signaling technology and infrastructure support for high-speed rail than you use for conventional. So we're assuming that the rail just wouldn't be left there unused, that you would run some conventional traffic on the Madera to Poplar Avenue corridor. Operational expenses for then underutilized of an infrastructure asset. So we're building it for high-speed rail, but we're using it for a more conventional system. So we're probably not using it to its full extent and potential. And you're going to have limited environmental improvements because it will not be electrified. It'll most likely be some kind of a diesel system. And so your greenhouse gas emissions and other carbon footprint opportunities that you have with high-speed rail are not there. So if we do complete go back to slide 10, if you would just bear with me. If we do complete the segment, you'll get the standalone high-speed rail operation between Merced and Bakersfield as a demonstration, and also it starts the process of real high-speed rail in the state of California. We believe it can create significant value by connecting cities along the corridor, Bakersfield up through Merced. More train miles, quicker travel time. It complements the statewide rail plan enhancements that are planned for ACE and San Joaquin lines. So we've completed our qualitative analysis, and we're now deep into the quantitative analysis. And again, we're working with our stakeholders. So, Ms. Friedman, to your point earlier, we're in close communication and dialogue with Caltrains, Metrolink, LA Metro, the Los Angeles, San Obispo, and San Diego Transit Agency, CalSTA, San Joaquin Regional Rail Commission, and San Joaquin Joint Power Authority to provide information, to get feedback, and to also make sure we incorporate that all into our final report. The final report will summarize high-speed rail capital cost and show regional benefits and needs. It'll also take a look at and provide quantitative data on ridership, greenhouse gas emission reduction, and congestion relief. We expect to have that final quantitative report ready mid of Q1 2020. Thank you.